The rain had been falling since noon, turning the narrow streets of Naples into rivers of silver light. Umbrellas bloomed like dark flowers, people hurried under doorways, and somewhere between the rush and the thunder, Elena Rossi trudged home with a paper bag of groceries pressed against her chest. The diner had closed early. Her feet ached, her uniform was damp, and the coins in her pocket barely clinked. Still, she smiled at the thought of her little brother, Marco, waiting at home with his wild hair and wide eyes. She had promised him warm soup tonight, their first real meal in days. But fate, as usual, had other plans. At the corner of Via Roma, the wind tore the bag open. Apples rolled into puddles, bread landed face down in the mud, and a bottle shattered like glass tears across the cobblestones. For a moment, Elena simply stood there, soaked and shaking, watching everything she'd worked for scatter away. She wanted to scream, but all that came out was a whisper. "Not tonight, please, not tonight." She knelt, picking up what she could, half a loaf, a bruised apple, a few coins that had slipped from her pocket. Her fingers were red from the cold. No one stopped to help. People walked past, eyes down, pretending not to see. Then through the rain's steady hum, a black car slowed beside her. The kind of car that didn't belong in this part of the city, sleek, silent, and expensive. Its tinted window rolled down halfway. A man stepped out. He didn't carry an umbrella. The rain didn't seem to touch him. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark wool coat, he moved with quiet certainty, like someone used to being obeyed without a word. His presence shifted the air around her, sharp and still, like thunder before a storm. Without speaking, he crouched down and began gathering the fallen groceries. His hands were steady, gloved, deliberate. When he stood, he offered her the rescued loaf of bread and his umbrella in one smooth motion. "You shouldn't be out in this weather," he said, his voice low, almost too calm for the chaos around them. Elena blinked through the rain. He didn't look like a man used to kindness or the kind who offered it. His jaw was cut from stone, his eyes unreadable under the streetlight's glow. "I can't afford to wait for the rain to stop," she replied, clutching the groceries like armor. He studied her for a moment, the tremor in her voice, the exhaustion in her eyes. Then his lips curved, not in a smile, but something close. "Then let me walk you home." Her heart stumbled. "That's not necessary, sir. I live nearby." "It wouldn't be a problem." "It would be," she said quickly, stepping back. She'd heard stories about men like him. Men with power, with names whispered rather than spoken. And though she didn't know his yet, every instinct in her told her to keep her distance. He didn't argue. Instead, he closed the umbrella and handed it to her. "Take it anyway," he said quietly. "You'll catch your death out here." Before she could refuse, he turned and walked back to the car. The door shut, the engine purred, and he drove off into the night. But a few streets away, as Elena hurried home, she didn't know the black car had slowed again. Its headlights dimmed, following at a careful distance. Her building was old, its paint peeling, the stairwell filled with the scent of damp wood and oil. She climbed to the second floor, pushing open the door to their tiny apartment. Inside, warmth, faint but real. Marco, her 7-year-old brother, was sitting on the couch wrapped in a blanket, watching the rain crawl down the window. "Elena," he cried, running up to her, "you're soaked." She laughed softly, setting the groceries on the counter. "I'm fine, see, dinner is still here, kind of." He frowned at her dripping hair. "You should have taken an umbrella." "I have one now," she said, glancing at the black umbrella the stranger had left her. It looked far too elegant to belong in their home, like a piece of another world. Marco didn't notice her hesitation. He climbed onto the couch again, humming to himself as she prepared their meal. She moved carefully, quietly, as though afraid the fragile piece would shatter like the bottle on the street. When the soup was ready, she served it in chipped bowls. They ate by candlelight, the power flickered as thunder rolled again outside. And then, for a brief, beautiful moment, she forgot the rain. Outside, parked across the street under a flickering lamppost, the black car returned. Inside, Lorenzo De Luca leaned back in the leather seat, cigarette between his fingers, watching the dimly lit window across from him. The smoke coiled around his hand like memory. He didn't know why he'd stopped earlier. He never stopped. Not for beggars, not for strangers, not for anyone. But when he'd seen her kneeling in the rain, small, soaked, defiant, something inside him had frozen. She looked like her. Lucia. His wife, the woman he had loved and lost, in the same city under the same kind of rain. He could still remember that night, Lucia's laughter echoing in the courtyard, the way her hair clung to her face as she told him to come inside, the gunshots that followed moments later. She'd been caught in the crossfire meant for him. Since then, he'd built walls around his empire, around his heart. But seeing this girl tonight, it was like watching a ghost breathe again. He took another drag from the cigarette, eyes narrowing on the window where Alina sat with her brother. They were laughing over something, he couldn't hear it, but he didn't need to. The sound played in his mind, filling a silence he hadn't noticed until it broke. "She has a child," his driver murmured from the front seat. Lorenzo didn't correct him. He didn't explain. It didn't matter whether the boy was hers or not. What mattered was the look on her face, that stubborn mix of exhaustion and hope. He exhaled slowly. Drive. The car rolled forward, tires whispering against the wet pavement. But even after they turned the corner, he could still see her in his mind, the soaked hair, the trembling hands, the way she refused his help and still thanked him with her eyes. Lorenzo De Luca was a man who dealt in debts and promises. But tonight, for reasons he couldn't name, he felt like the one who owed something. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was memory. Or maybe, though he wouldn't admit it yet, it was fate, walking home under the same rain he'd once cursed. As the city lights blurred behind the windshield, he whispered to himself, "Just coincidence, nothing more." But even he didn't believe it. Because some coincidences don't happen by chance. They're written in the rain long before you ever look up. The next morning, the small bell above the cafe door chimed with its usual sweetness, cutting through the hiss of steaming milk and chatter. Alina wiped her hands on her apron, her movements brisk but careful. The scent of roasted beans, sugar, and cinnamon clung to her skin, the smell of survival. It was supposed to be just another morning. Another day of pretending she wasn't exhausted, pretending she didn't have to count coins before paying rent. But when the door swung open again, she froze. A tall man stepped in dark coat, rain still clinging to his shoulders, the kind of presence that made people move without realizing it. His eyes were colder than the October wind outside, but somehow they softened when they met hers. For a heartbeat, everything went still. Alina's pulse stuttered. She knew that face. The man from last night, the stranger who'd silently walked behind her through the rain, keeping distance yet close enough that she'd felt protected. He said nothing as he approached the counter. Black coffee, no sugar. Even his voice felt carved from marble, low, deliberate, like someone who was used to being obeyed. She nodded, turning to the machine, forcing her hands not to tremble, coming right up. The coffee steamed between them. When she slid the cup across the counter, his fingers brushed hers, light, almost accidental. A jolt ran through her. He placed a $100 bill on the counter. She blinked. "This is too much." He didn't look away. "Keep it." "I don't take pity, sir." She pushed the bill back, her tone firm despite the tightness in her throat. Something flickered in his eyes, amusement, maybe admiration. "Then consider it gratitude for letting me walk behind you last night." Her breath caught, so he remembered. Before she could say anything, he turned and left, leaving the scent of rain, smoke, and mystery behind. Alina stood there long after the door closed, staring at the untouched coffee cup still warm in her hands. Night fell heavy over the city. Neon lights flickered against puddles, and Alina pulled her thin jacket tighter. She stayed late at work. Extra hours meant a few more dollars, maybe enough for her brother's next round of medicine. The alley shortcut was dark but familiar, or so she thought. "Hey, sweetheart," a voice slurred behind her. Two men stepped out from the shadows, rough faces, eyes sharp with greed. "Where's our money?" Her stomach dropped. She recognized them, loan sharks from the clinic district, the ones who'd lent her cash months ago before her brother's condition worsened. "I told you I just need a few more days," she said, voice trembling. One of them laughed, stepping closer. "Days don't pay debts." They cornered her, the stench of alcohol burning her nose. One grabbed her bag, yanking hard enough to tear the strap. "Please." The sound of tires screeching against asphalt cut her off. A black car swerved into the alley, headlights slicing through the dark. The men stepped back, shielding their eyes as the car stopped inches from them. The driver's door opened with deliberate slowness. And then he appeared. Lorenzo De Luca. No raincoat this time, just a tailored suit that whispered money and menace. His expression was unreadable as he closed the door and walked toward them. "You touched something that belongs to me," he said, voice calm but ice cold. The loan sharks froze. One stammered, "We didn't know." "You do now." His tone didn't rise, but it didn't need to. Power hummed in the air around him, coiled like a gun waiting to fire. The men stumbled back, muttering apologies before vanishing into the night. Elena stood trembling, pressed against the brick wall, eyes wide with shock and confusion. He stopped a few feet away, looking at her, really looking. The bruised fear in her eyes, the broken strap, the trembling hands gripping her coat. "You're safe now," he said softly. Something in his voice, something raw and sincere, broke her. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. She hadn't cried like this in years, not when her parents died, not when her brother fell sick. But those words, simple, impossible words, cracked something open. Lorenzo hesitated for the briefest moment, then removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders. The fabric was warm, heavy with his scent, cedarwood and smoke. She looked up at him, voice breaking. "Why would you help me?" His gaze softened, though his face stayed controlled. "Because someone should have, a long time ago." The silence that followed felt intimate, fragile. Then, as if remembering who he was, he turned slightly toward the car. "My driver will take you home." "I can walk." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "You've had enough walking for one night." And before she could argue, he gestured to the driver, a silent man who opened the backseat door. Elena hesitated, clutching the coat closer. But something in Lorenzo's eyes, not command, not pity, but quiet insistence, made her nod. She slid into the car, her heartbeat still wild. As the car pulled away, she glanced through the window. Lorenzo stood alone in the alley, the glow of a streetlight outlining his silhouette. For the first time, he didn't look like a monster. He looked like a man carrying a burden no one else could see. Morning sunlight painted Elena's apartment in shades of gold and dust. For a moment, she forgot everything, the fear, the car, the man. Then she saw it. A bouquet rested against her door, white lilies and crimson roses tied with a black ribbon. Tucked inside, a card. "For the woman who stood in the rain, LD." Her stomach knotted. She should have thrown it away. She told herself that as she locked the door, as she walked to work, as she tried to focus on the cash register and coffee orders. But the initials burned behind her eyes. By afternoon, she couldn't take it anymore. She found herself standing outside De Luca Café, the upscale cafe across town that bore his family name. She'd seen it before, all glass walls, gold accents, and men in suits at every table. It was nothing like the humble shop where she worked. When she entered, heads turned. Her simple clothes stood out against the luxury, but she didn't care. He was there at the corner table, reading a file, a cup of espresso, untouched beside him. He looked up before she could even speak, as if he'd been waiting. "Elena," he said, using her name for the first time. It rolled off his tongue like a secret. She walked up, holding the bouquet in both hands. "You need to stop this." He raised an eyebrow. "Stop what?" "Whatever this is. The flowers, the driver, last night. I don't need your protection." A faint smirk ghosted across his lips. "Everyone says that, until they do." Her anger flared. "You think money and bodyguards fix everything. I've lived my whole life without needing people like you." And how has that worked out for you? His words were sharp but not cruel, more like a mirror than a knife. She froze because he was right. Lorenzo leaned back, eyes studying her carefully. You're strong, Elena, but strength doesn't mean walking alone into every storm. Her voice softened unwillingly. And what are you offering? A cage with nicer walls? He chuckled quietly. You think I'm offering you a cage? Maybe I'm offering a door. To what? He didn't answer, just stood, leaving a few crisp bills on the table. As he passed her, he whispered near her ear, low enough for only her to hear. To a world that won't hurt you again. Then he was gone. Elena stood there, clutching the bouquet, heart pounding with something she didn't want to name. Anger, curiosity, longing, fear, all at once. Outside, the city roared, cars, voices, rain beginning to fall again. She stepped out into it without an umbrella. The lilies trembled in her hands as raindrops gathered on the petals. She hated how part of her wished he'd appear again. That night, as Elena returned home, she noticed a black car parked near the corner. The same car from before. Her pulse quickened, but this time it wasn't Lorenzo. A figure inside lowered the window slightly, revealing a scarred man with a cigarette and a smirk. You look just like he described, he said. Elena froze. Before she could respond, the window rolled up and the car drove away into the dark. She stood there on the sidewalk, drenched, her heart thundering. Somewhere in the city, a man named Lorenzo De Luca had just made her part of his world, whether she wanted it or not. The warehouse smelled of oil and gunmetal. Lorenzo De Luca stood near the window, staring out at the gray dawn stretching over the docks. His men waited in silence, tension thick as smoke. Boss, said Matteo, his second in command. We've got eyes on her. The Carusos sent 2 men near her building last night. Lorenzo's hand tightened around his glass of whiskey. The amber liquid barely moved, but his jaw clenched like steel. They know she matters to me, he said flatly. Matteo hesitated. Should we move her, bring her somewhere safer? Lorenzo turned, his gaze colder than the morning air. No, that'll only confirm their suspicion. Keep the cars distant, rotate shifts. She doesn't know and she won't. Matteo nodded but didn't move. He'd seen that look before, the haunted kind that came only when Lorenzo remembered her. When the others left, Lorenzo sat in silence. He poured another drink but didn't touch it. The memories came anyway, the blood, the rain, the scream. His wife, Sophia, standing in the crossfire 10 years ago, eyes wide in shock before falling into his arms. He could still smell the perfume mixing with gunpowder. He whispered to the empty room, not again. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Meanwhile, Elena felt it before she understood it, that prickling sense that she was being watched. The same dark sedan parked across from her building 3 nights in a row. Men she didn't recognize loitering near the corner store. She told herself it was paranoia, that the shadows she saw from her window were tricks of the light. But when one of them followed her halfway home from work, she broke into a run. By the time she locked her door behind her, her chest was tight and tears stung her eyes. She pressed her back to the wood, breathing hard. And then, for reasons she couldn't explain, she whispered one name into the dark. Lorenzo. She stormed into his office the next day, rain-soaked, furious, trembling. His men tried to stop her, but one sharp look from Lorenzo made them step aside. Elena, he began, but she cut him off. Are you having me followed? Her voice cracked, but her eyes didn't waver. Because if you are, it ends now. He exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. The contrast between her fire and his calm was electric. Yes, he said simply, I am. Her breath caught. You what? Why would you? Because I don't intend to bury another woman because of me. The words silenced her. The room went utterly still, just the rain tapping against the tall windows. His tone softened. The Carusos have taken interest. They think you're leverage. You're not safe, Elena. I never asked for your help, she said, voice trembling. I never asked to be part of your world. He rose from his chair, slow, deliberate. You stepped into it the night you saved that old woman, my mother. Elena froze. You're what? She didn't tell you? His eyes met hers, a ghost of a smile on his lips. You fought off 2 men for her. She told me about a girl with fire in her eyes. I didn't expect to find you again like this. Elena's anger faltered, replaced by disbelief. That night, she was your mother. Yes, his voice dropped low. And I repay my debts, Elena. She shook her head, voice raw. You think debt makes you human, you can't protect everyone, you'll drown trying. He stepped closer, just enough for her to feel the warmth of him. No, he said quietly, but I can protect you. For a long, trembling moment, neither moved. The rain outside grew heavier, filling the silence. Her eyes flicked to his lips, then back to his eyes, terrified of what she might do if she stayed a second longer. Finally, she stepped back. You don't even know who I am. I know enough, he murmured. You don't run from the dark, you face it, and that's exactly why it wants to destroy you. She turned away, heart racing, tears stinging. Then maybe you should stop bringing darkness to my door. She left before he could answer, her footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. Lorenzo stood there, watching the door close. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. The call came 3 days later. Elena was halfway through her shift when her phone buzzed, Marco's school. Her stomach dropped before she even answered. Your brother collapsed, the voice said. He's being taken to Mercy Hospital. She dropped everything and ran. The hospital lights were blindingly white, the smell of disinfectant suffocating. She found Marco pale and unconscious, tubes attached to his thin arms. Her heart broke all over again. The doctor's words blurred, complications, chronic damage, treatment needed immediately. Then came the cost, a number that might as well have been a mountain. Elena's throat closed. She had nothing left to sell, no loans left to take. The walls felt like they were closing in when the door opened behind her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Lorenzo. He approached quietly, nodding to the doctor, who gave him a knowing look before stepping out. Everything will be taken care of, Lorenzo said. Her head snapped up. No, you can't. It's done. He placed a folded receipt on the counter. He's being moved to a private room. You'll have what you need. Why? Her voice cracked under the weight of confusion and exhaustion. Why would you do this for me? He met her gaze, steady and unflinching. Because I couldn't save the last person I loved. I won't make the same mistake again. Tears welled in her eyes, but anger mixed with gratitude. You don't even know me, Lorenzo. You think saving me makes you clean. I don't want to be clean, he said softly. I just want to be different. The silence that followed was almost unbearable, too full of things neither dared to say. The doctor returned, clearing his throat. Marco's stable for now, but he'll need long-term care, months, maybe longer. Elena's chest tightened. I can't afford. Lorenzo interrupted. Then you'll work for me. She blinked. What? My household needs a chef, someone I can trust. You'll live at the estate. Cook, manage small things. You'll be paid enough for Marco's treatment. Her instinct was to refuse. Every warning bell in her body screamed danger. But then she looked at Marco, at the pale boy who was her whole world. Her voice broke, and if I say no. He hesitated, his tone softening. Then I'll still pay for his care, but I'd rather help you earn it. She looked away, torn between pride and desperation. You don't make this easy. I'm not an easy man. Their eyes met, one filled with defiance, the other with silent promise. Finally she whispered, Fine, only until Marco recovers. He nodded, a shadow of relief passing over his face. Agreed. As he left the room, Elena sank into the chair beside her brother's bed. Her heart was pounding, her hands cold. She just stepped into the lion's den, and part of her wasn't sure she wanted to find the way out. Outside the hospital, rain began to fall again, soft at first, then harder, washing the city in silver. Lorenzo stood beneath the awning, looking up at the storm. He lit a cigarette he didn't smoke, watching the smoke twist into the rain. "Forgive me," he whispered to no one, because he knew, no matter how pure his intentions, every step he took to save her would only pull her deeper into his world. The black car stopped before the DeLuca estate, a vast mansion of stone and silence. Elena stepped out, clutching Marco's hand. The air smelled of rain and pine, the gardens too perfectly trimmed to feel real. Guards in black suits stood at the gate. Their eyes followed her not unkindly, but with quiet curiosity. A maid opened the tall oak doors, bowing slightly. Elena's breath caught as she stepped into the grand hall, marble floors, chandeliers that glittered like frozen light, and a staircase that curved upward like something from a dream. It wasn't home. It was a world she had no right to belong in. Lorenzo appeared at the top of the stairs, dressed simply but commanding every inch of the space. Marco's eyes widened. He had only ever seen the man in newspapers, surrounded by headlines and whispers. "Welcome," Lorenzo said. His voice carried warmth this time, softer than she'd ever heard. "Your rooms are ready." Marco clutched her arm, whispering, "Is he the boss?" Elena nodded slightly. "Yes, but he's helping us, remember that?" The boy hesitated, then smiled shyly up at Lorenzo. "Thank you, sir." Lorenzo's lips curved faintly but genuinely. "You'll call me Lorenzo, not sir." That small kindness made something loosen in Elena's chest. As the staff led them to their rooms, she felt the heavy weight of eyes. The house itself seemed to watch her. Everything smelled faintly of cedar and memory. Later that evening, when she entered the dining room to serve dinner, the guards lowered their heads in respect. Her hands trembled as she carried a tray of pasta. She wasn't a maid anymore, she was something in between, a guest, a worker, and perhaps a distraction. From across the table, Lorenzo watched her move with quiet grace. Every laugh from Marco, every shy smile from her, seemed to breathe warmth into the mansion's cold halls. For the first time in years, he found himself smiling without realizing it. Matteo, his 9-year-old son, noticed first. "Papa," Matteo whispered, leaning closer, "you look happy again." Lorenzo froze for a moment, the words cutting deep, sweetly and painfully. "Do I?" he murmured. The boy nodded. "She makes the house not lonely." Lorenzo didn't answer, but when his eyes lifted to meet Elena's across the table, he knew Matteo was right. The loneliness he'd built into armor was beginning to crack. It was past midnight when Elena couldn't sleep. She wandered through dimly lit corridors, the echo of her footsteps swallowed by thick carpets. She paused at a locked door, one she hadn't been shown earlier. The keyhole glimmered faintly. For reasons she couldn't name, she pressed the handle and it opened with a soft click. The air inside was cool, scented faintly with turpentine and dust. Paintings lined the walls, portraits, landscapes, and sketches, but one stole her breath. A woman standing in a garden, wearing a white dress. Her face, looked exactly like Elena's. She stumbled closer, heart hammering. The signature read, Sofia DeLuca, 2013. Lorenzo's late wife. The resemblance was uncanny. The same eyes, the same slope of cheek. Only the expression differed. The woman in the painting smiled with peace, while Elena's reflection in the glass looked like a ghost. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until he spoke. She painted that a year before she died. Elena turned sharply. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, his face unreadable in the low light. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, but there was no anger, only sorrow. "I didn't mean to intrude," she whispered, "but she looks like me." He walked closer, his eyes fixed on the portrait. "Yes, I noticed that the first day we met." Her throat tightened. "So that's why you brought me here," she said bitterly, "because I remind you of her." He met her gaze, steady, pained. "No, I brought you here because you make me feel like she's still alive." The words hit harder than she expected. For a long time, neither spoke. The rain outside brushed against the windows like whispered memories. Finally, she said, "You should have told me." "Would it have changed anything?" he asked softly. "You would have run, and maybe you should have." She looked away, her chest aching. "I'm not her Lorenzo." I know, his voice was almost a whisper. That's what makes it harder. The silence that followed was thick with things unsaid, grief, guilt, something like longing. When she finally left the room, her hands trembled. She didn't see the single tear Lorenz wiped away as soon as she disappeared down the hall. The next evening brought rain, soft and endless, the kind that made the world seem quieter, gentler. Elena stood in the kitchen, stirring soup while Marco and Matteo laughed in the next room. Their laughter spilled into the hall like sunlight breaking through clouds. For once, the house didn't feel haunted, it felt alive. She carried dinner to the table herself. The two boys were arguing playfully over bread, their faces bright with innocence. Lorenzo sat at the head of the table, watching, but his usual sternness was gone. His expression was softer now, touched with something she couldn't quite name. As she poured him wine, their hands brushed just a second, but it sent a strange, unsteady warmth up her arm. "Sit," he said quietly. She hesitated. "I shouldn't." "Please," he added, and the simple word undid her. She sat beside the boys, listening to their laughter fill the room. Marco told a joke that made even Lorenzo's stone face crack into a faint, genuine smile. For a brief, fragile moment, it felt like family. Later, when the boys had gone to bed, Elena stayed to clean up. Lorenzo lingered near the window, watching the rain fall against the glass. "You've changed this house," he said without turning. "It used to feel empty." Elena smiled faintly. Maybe it was never empty, maybe it was just waiting for the right people. He looked at her then, really looked. The firelight danced in her eyes, and he saw not just her resemblance to Sophia, but her own light, her own courage. "When you're here," he murmured, voice low and rough, "it feels like the storm finally stopped." Her breath caught. For a moment the room was utterly still, the kind of silence that says everything words can't. Then she turned away, whispering, "Don't say things like that." "Why not?" he asked. "Because storms don't stop," she said softly. "They just rest before they start again." He watched her go, her figure disappearing into the dim hallway. His hand brushed the edge of the wine glass she'd touched, still warm. He smiled, not the cold smirk of a mafia boss, but the tired smile of a man learning what it means to feel again. Outside, thunder rumbled softly, not violent this time, but distant, like a heartbeat beneath the rain. The night was quiet, too quiet. The rain had stopped, and a cold mist hugged the De Luca estate. Elena was reading Marco and Matteo a bedtime story when she heard it, the sound of tires skidding on gravel. Then shouting. Then gunfire. Her heart froze. "Under the bed now," she whispered. The boys obeyed without question, eyes wide with fear. She locked the door and pressed her ear against it. The crack of gunshots echoed from downstairs. "Matteo," she said softly, "there's a small door behind the wardrobe. It leads to a crawl space. Take Marco and stay there. Don't make a sound." The boys crawled into the hidden compartment as glass shattered somewhere below. She grabbed the nearest thing, a fireplace poker, and turned toward the door, trembling but ready. Downstairs, chaos reigned. The Caruso men stormed through the grand hall, bullets tearing through marble and paintings. Lorenzo, blood streaking his cheek, fired back, each shot fueled by fury and desperation. He caught Matteo's bodyguard fall beside the staircase. His men were outnumbered. "Elena," he shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the noise. Upstairs, she heard his call and her heart broke. She wanted to run to him, but the boys. A heavy step outside her door, a voice she didn't know. "Boss said she's here." The doorknob twisted violently. She raised the poker. The door burst open, two men with guns. Before she could react, one lunged forward. She swung wildly, the metal connecting with his face. He fell, cursing, but the other grabbed her arm. And then a gunshot. The man dropped. Lorenzo stood at the doorway, breathing hard, his shirt torn and blood on his hands. He looked at her like he was seeing a ghost. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. She shook her head, voice trembling. "The children." "They're safe now," he said, lowering his weapon. "You did good, Elena, you did perfect." But before either could move, another shot rang out, the sound sharp, merciless. Lorenzo staggered, a bloom of red spreading across his shoulder. "Lorenzo!" she screamed, catching him as he fell. She dragged him into the corridor, pressed her hand over the wound, shaking. His eyes fluttered open, still full of fire. You need to take the boys." "No," she whispered fiercely. "I'm not leaving you." Somewhere below, police sirens wailed. The Carusos were retreating. The fight was ending, but the damage was done. When it was finally quiet, she sat beside him on the blood-slick floor, tears mixing with the dust. He reached for her hand weakly. "You kept them safe," he murmured. You kept me safe." She pressed her forehead to his. "Don't talk, help's coming." He gave a faint, pained smile. "I've already had help." Morning came with the faint scent of smoke and rain. The mansion was scarred, broken glass, shattered marble, bloodstains, but alive. Lorenzo lay in his study, bandaged and pale. When he opened his eyes, Alina was there, sitting quietly beside him. She looked exhausted but unbroken. "You risked everything," she whispered. "For me, for them." His voice was low, rough. "I already lost everything once, Alina, not again." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She took his hand gently. This man who had terrified her, changed her, saved her. "You're safe now," she said softly. The words hit him like a memory, the same ones he'd once spoken to her in the rain. A full circle, bound not by fear but by something deeper. He smiled faintly. "So are you." Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in days, casting gold across the ruined hall. And for the first time in years, Lorenzo De Luca, the man the world called a monster, finally let himself believe in peace. Months later, the De Luca estate no longer echoed with gunfire or fear, only laughter. Marco and Matteo played in the garden, their laughter carrying through the open windows. The air smelled of fresh bread and blooming roses. Alina stood by the kitchen window, flour on her hands, watching them with a smile that reached her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt safe, not because walls or guards protected her, but because peace finally did. On the balcony above, Lorenzo leaned against the railing, his shoulder healed but the scars still visible, reminders of what they'd survived. Yet in his eyes was something new, calm, even joy. Alina joined him, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're thinking again," she teased. He looked at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Funny, it never rains anymore." She slipped her hand into his, eyes soft. Maybe the storm finally passed. He squeezed her fingers gently. "And if it ever comes back." She smiled, gaze on the golden horizon. "But even if it does, we'll walk through it together." The sun dipped low, warm and steady, the promise of a quieter tomorrow.